Cornelia Meyer is an international economist and chief executive of MRL Corporation. She's in our Westminster studio. So, Cornelia, Dominic Waghorn pointing out there Donald Trump almost taking credit for that. Is it any coincidence that this blockade and this dropping of diplomatic ties comes only a matter of days after he visited Saudi Arabia?
No, probably not, because probably Saudi, UAE, for whom the Qatari, as you called it, neutrality was a little bit of a thorn in the eye, and, you know, to whom also the Qataris have been rubbing it in somehow. That was, for them, it was a thorn in the eye, and it gave them an excuse to do it. But as you know, we're talking economics here, it's not good for the Qatari economy, as evidenced by the stock market, as evidenced by the currency. Planes now, the Qatar Airways planes can't fly over the airspaces of these countries anymore, so they have to have huge detours. 40% of the food into Qatar comes from Saudi Arabia, so that now has to be flown in. So the cost of living in Qatar is bound to skyrocket.
Yeah, I gather a few years ago, they've had these kind of spats before. A few years ago, Qatar had to go without chickens for several months in about 2012 because they couldn't get them across the land border with Saudi.
Yeah, exactly. And in 2014, the Kuwaitis mediated. And, you know, we've been speaking about what the US is doing, and Tillerson was right. He said, you know, these are old spats. These spats go back in history as well. You know, for long, you know, 19th century. But he was right. He said, look, we need to de-escalate. And the Kuwaitis are now trying to de-escalate. And they have brokered a deal in 2014 already. So they have experience in mediating between the Qataris and the rest of the GCC nations.
Now, what's this going to mean for oil and gas prices? I mean, the oil price jumped initially yesterday because everyone thought that this would somehow constrict supplies. But, I mean, Qatar is not a big oil producer. It's only about 2% of OPEC. Its real firepower is in gas, isn't it?
Yeah, its real firepower is in gas, and that's also why they sort of work with the Iranians a little bit, because it's the same. Their North Field is the Iranian South Pars Field. They're sharing a gas field, so that's one thing. But for OPEC, it means the price then came down because they said, oh, what's happening to the OPEC deal? The OPEC deal stands. Look, OPEC has worked through the Iran-Iraq war. OPEC has the Saudis and the Iranians collaborating right now on the OPEC deal. So the markets are overreacting there in sort of being bearish on the OPEC deal. It stands as is.
But what about countries like the UK, which is quite heavily dependent on liquefied natural gas imports from Qatar? Japan is another country that depends an awful lot on Qatari gas. Is there any suggestion that this is going to hit exports of LNG?
I don't think it will, because it will take the sea lanes, the international sea lanes, where nobody can do anything. And let's not forget one thing, and that's when you see Rex Tillerson saying we need to de-escalate. He used to be the CEO of Exxon for more than a decade before becoming Secretary of State. Exxon and Shell are the really the 300-pound gorillas in terms of the LNG space in Qatar, and they will make sure we still get our gas. We also have a lot of investment from the Qatar Investment Authority, their sovereign wealth fund. They own chunks of Heathrow Airport. They own chunks of other infrastructure. They own Harrods. They own the Shard. So they're one of the largest landlords in London.